and welcome to another episode of It's a History podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week we are joined by author Nicole Nehrig to discuss her latest release, With Her Own Hands, Women Weaving Their Stories. Nicole is a clinical psychologist and a knitter, and in this book, she explores the role of textile work in shaping women's lives across cultures and centuries. Without further ado, let's get right into the conversation. Of course, this is the preliminary Zoom recording warning, but with that, let's get into it. So, welcome to another episode of It's a History podcast. Today we have on Nicole to talk about her most recent release. Do you want to go into maybe a little bit about yourself and how this book came to be?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist, and so I think a lot about what makes a meaningful life, how people make a meaningful life out of what they have available to them. I'm also a knitter, and knitting has always been a really meaningful thing for me and has at times taken on a lot of metaphorical meaning and given me ways to reflect on myself and reflect on what's going on with me at times. So kind of interweaving the psychology and the textile craft. But during the pandemic, it really took on new meaning as like the world shut down and we were at home, and I was trying to balance work and two little kids and their Zoom schools and taking care of everything that needed to be done around the house and using what we had at home to try to make the best out of a challenging situation. And I just found knitting taking on new meaning in my life. It really became a place that I could channel my creative and intellectual interests, especially at a time when my research was kind of just ground to a halt. And that had been a really important way for me to engage with people and think about ideas. And so it was just this really, it took front and center in my life. It was really the only thing I could do for myself because I had no time actually to myself, but textile work is compatible with taking care of children, which is potentially why it has been women's work in a lot of places throughout history. So it made me think about, other women at different times in different places and what this work meant to them because it did satisfy so many things that other aspects of kind of everyday domestic life don't. It did provide a way for me to be creative and soothe myself and get lost in kind of a repetitive pattern and daydream and all of these wonderful things that are important for our psychological well-being. And yeah, so I started kind of researching and reading and trying to find any accounts that I could find about what this work meant to women, as far back as I could and in very different places. And I didn't find as much as I really wanted to. And so I thought, well, maybe I should write something. And so I started talking to women around the world about what this work means to them and using that as kind of the foundation for the book, and then drawing on historical and archaeological and anthropological reports and everything to deepen our understanding of this subject.
Yeah, I'm a crocheter. I've crocheted since I was 11. I learned on YouTube because I did not have anyone in my personal life that had done it. So I took my little 11-year-old self. I asked my mom to bring me to Walmart to get some yarn, and I've been crocheting ever since. And it's just something that I do when I don't know, when my mind is busy. I like to do something with my hands. It helps me work through some of my thoughts, if that makes sense. But I have been very interested in textile work as like an aspect of history for a while. I took a few classes when I was in college, like humanities S classes, and one of them we focused a lot on textile work. And there's something about like the big like embroidery pieces that have been made that like you can see like where different people were working on it, how you can see like how like the skill level like changes throughout it. And I think it's just something that is it's such a like tactile piece of art that you can really see like the process behind it.
Mhm.
And especially with it being something that has been traditionally women's domain to be doing textiles, I don't know, I just feel like a certain connection with that as a woman who does do that kind of craft.
Absolutely. And it does connect us to this rich lineage over so many centuries and millennia, even. I think it is a really meaningful thing. I also learned how to knit from YouTube. And I'm really dating myself because this was like right when YouTube started. So I was like, oh, thank goodness there's, YouTube, because if I had tried to teach myself to knit 5 years ago or something, I would have had to rely on books and just these like drawings and stuff to
Yes.
figure it out. And I remember getting stuck once, and I didn't really know any knitters in my world. Like nobody in my family knit. And this was really even before there were that many like small yarn, like nice yarn stores where you could kind
Mhm.
of go in and ask questions. I didn't have any of those in my area. So there's like Michael's. I remember trying to go to Michael's and asking somebody for help, and nobody, they were just like, oh, I can't help you with that. And then I was telling people that I was having problems, and my mom was like, oh, I know one woman who knits. Maybe she can help you. And so I think like we talked on the phone and I was explaining what was going on, and I was knitting a scarf. And somehow I had cast on like 35 stitches, and now there were like 46 stitches. And I was like, I don't know. And it was like growing on one side. There was like an
Yeah.
angle happening. And this was my first scarf. And I just was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And she was like, oh, and she like got out her knitting, and she's like, I bet what you're doing is pulling the yarn to the back and accidentally making another stitch at the beginning of each row. And that was in fact what I was doing. But thank God for her, because I just could not figure out what was happening, and I had nobody around to help me with that. And, YouTube didn't have any answers for me at that time. So it's a
Um,
very different world now.
yes, when I worked at Joann's, I was the yarn person. Like I would help people with like help a lot of people would be like, I don't even know where to start. So I'd start them with yarn that I liked to use that's like just like a regular like anti-pill yarn, size 5 hook. And then I can't remember the name of the YouTube channel that I would say. I'm like, just watch this YouTube channel. She like does a great job with explaining. And then one of the very like my very last day when I was working there, someone was like, I have this project. I don't know what I'm doing. And I was like, it's my last day. I'm like, just come in. I'll help you. And we figured out that she was using yarn that was like one size too small for what the project had called for. So like all of the dimensions were just not
Off.
what
Yeah.
they needed to be. And I was like, oh, and she was like, oh, thank you so much for helping. I'm like, because it's such a, a community thing, like to be able to, talk to someone about it and be like, oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you're able to see the problem or like where like a mistake is happening. And it's just something that I do think helps build community around, just something that's, I don't know, it is predominantly women who do it. So it's nice to just have that space to be with, other like-minded people.
Yeah, and I feel like people are so generous in this world too, in being willing to help or eager to help. I love teaching people to knit. If somebody tells me
Mhm.
like, oh, like maybe I'll take a class or something, I'm like, just come over and I'll teach you. I don't want my friends to go have to take a class and learn from a stranger. Like, just come sit on my couch and we'll have a glass of wine and I'll show you what's up. So.
Yep. And I getting to your book, one of the things that I really appreciated that you wrote about was like how much thought actually goes into making, these things. Even something like a scarf, like 35 cast on stitches and somehow you're getting to 46 and something's happening there, but you have to be able to think about what exactly is happening with it. And then when you get to these big pieces of like fabric that people are making, like, and they had to just retain that like in their brains while they have to cook dinner, while they have two kids running around in the background. It's a lot of mental thought that is not it's not seen, it's not seen work that you're not seeing happen. And I really appreciated reading through that section. I'm like, yes, like I have 4 projects going, but I know exactly where I'm at each one at
Yeah.
all times. Like I can just pick it up and no one sees that I have that going on in
And
the
all the math you did to figure
Mhm.
out, what you need to be doing and how many stitches and, your gauge, when you were talking about the yarn that was too small,
Mhm.
or the needles that were too small for the yarn, you have to figure out gauge. You have to, calculate out the math of, is this going to fit me? If my body is this size, like I need to make a sweater that fits my body. And
Mhm.
I can't just go by the pattern because I might knit tightly or loosely, or the yarn might be a little different. And it is a lot of work. And these you think of weavers who make these really complex patterns and hold the pattern in mind as they're making it. And I went to Peru and talked with weavers in Peru that make just the most intricate designs in their textiles, and they have it all memorized. There's nothing written down. They learned it from their mothers or their grandmothers or another woman in their community, and they have memorized it and hold it in mind and think through it the whole time they're making it. And yeah, you see these studies or things about gender differences and male and female brains, and male brains are more systematizing and female brains are like more linguistic or empathizing, and that's why they're in caregiving professions and all these things. But the weaving, and I mean, this is systematizing. This is like really complex numbers and patterns that are being held in mind and organized. Yeah, it's really incredible work and very intellectual work.
Yes, even when you were talking about the different dyes that they would use like to dye the thread and like different formulas that they would have to use to make certain colors or how different liquids like pH balance would affect something else. Like that does is something that comes with trial and error, but over time that's just something that you end up passing down like generation after generation to keep it going. And those things are like they don't just happen. Like you have to actually work for that and try things out once it's been created. Sometimes we don't think about the process that went into actually getting to the point where we can just be like, oh well, you need these three things and that's it. Like it takes time for those things to come about.
Yeah, and now we have some more understanding of the chemistry of all of that and why these things happen. But at that time, thousands of years ago, and people have been dying with plants for thousands of years, many tens of thousands, that, somebody was going out and picking up stuff in the forest or the jungle or whatever, and, putting it together and tasting it and, like trying it out and seeing what works. And even in Indonesia, I was reading about the indigo dyeing there, and I wrote about it in the book. And, the women taste the indigo vat to make sure, like, they know they have kind of the recipe, but they also know by tasting and smelling and whatever, like, is this right? Right? Is the acidity level right? Or, is it too acid? Do I need to add something else? Like, all of these things are, go into making this thing work in incredible ways and work very effectively, but from kind of nowhere. If you think about the evolution of this skill and knowledge, it was just from somebody picking up stuff and saying, I wonder if this will work.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that you talked about was the lace makers and how they don't really have like a pattern. They just kind of use their bobbins and they go, and then they don't know if something's wrong until they do, and they're like, oh, that wasn't right, and then they're like it just feels wrong. Not that I make lace, but when I crochet, sometimes I'm like going through, I'm like, that just did not feel right, whatever I just did.
Yeah.
And then because a lot of times I do it when I watch TV, so like I'm not really paying 100% attention to what my hands are doing, and I'll be doing something I'm like, "Oh, that definitely was not correct." And I have to like go back and see what I was doing. But a lot of it is just through like touch and feel and like muscle memory and just that repetitive motion that you just get so used to over time that when something does even something small like doing a double crochet instead of a half double crochet by accident, and you're like, wait a second, that was one too many hook loops. Um,
Yeah, I have the same thing. I do a lot of color work knitting. And
mhm,
so you have kind of a row. And if it's a sweater, it's maybe, 300 stitches or something. So you're repeating this pattern over and over again. And it might be like three reds, one blue, four reds, two blue, three
mhm,
reds, one blue, and going across. And I'll accidentally do like two blues where I should have only done one blue. And I'll kind of then feel like, oh, wait, that didn't feel right. Like I have a rhythm
mhm,
going for that round. And then I do something and it doesn't feel right. And I look down, I'm like, oh, right, I was only supposed to do one blue there. And I did two, right? So yeah, it does it just kind of gets into your hands in this way. In the book, I talk about how that's embodied knowledge. Like that's not just muscle memory or like a rote kind of thing. That is our our minds knowing this so well that we can say, oh, that didn't feel right, even without really thinking, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to really hold it in mind so much. If you're kind of in the moment watching TV, you can kind of do it in this way that feels almost like you're not thinking, but you're
Mhm.
thinking with your hands.
One of the other aspects of, like cloth is the how important it is, like with the like tactile nature of it. Because you had spoken about when we're born, one of the first things that happens is we're like wrapped in a blanket. Whether it be one that like was made by someone within our family that has like sentimental value to it, or even today if you're born in a hospital, like you're wrapped in a blanket that's been mass produced.
Mhm.
It's just one of the things that it's one of the first things that we feel as people, like one of the very first things we feel like just being born. There's just something really special about that. I think that that one of the first things, especially if it's something that has like that sentimental value to it, like someone made this like just for you, the very first thing that you have like on your skin, but like as you first enter the world, I don't know. There was just something about it. I was like, that's just really something special.
Yeah, and it's something that provides comfort throughout our lives. We
Mhm.
love wrapping ourselves up in a blanket on the couch to watch TV, or having a big sweatshirt that is like our cozy home sweatshirt that we love to come home and put on when we're easing into a relaxing evening. And then historically, we were buried in shrouds. And so we were also wrapped in textiles on our way out of life, that it really has marked all the stages of life and is such a meaningful thing that we interact with as humans, both like in a physical way, but also in a psychological way.
We talked about it a little bit with like with the community aspect of crafting, with the stitching bitches, like knitting or crocheting and just yapping with your friends is always a good time. Or like the quilts, specifically the quilts of Gee's Bend, because quilting itself has a very extensive network of people who quilt. There's quilt shows. I One of my favorite things about working at Joann's was people showing me the pictures of their completed quilts, and I'm like, I cannot believe that you made that out of fabric. Like especially the ones where they would get into. There was one. This man, he would come in and he would make these quilts that were with lots of round shapes in them. So he did one. It was like a rubber ducky, but like there was all these bubbles
Wow.
in the quilt, and I was like, I that is just so impressive. Like I can't even, because I know how to sew, but not too much. Like it's not my craft of choice. But just knowing that like you can do stuff like that with a machine or with your hands, that's just I don't know.
Yeah,
The
round shapes are hard
round
in
shapes are
quilting.
very hard. I even sometimes have a hard time with round shapes with crocheting.
Hmm.
It always gets me at the end, the end of rounds, the first stitch. I don't know, something about it has always tripped me up. So I usually stick to rectangles for the most part. But just being able to have that community aspect of it, of sharing your designs or just being with someone while you're creating, is also something that's really special.
Yeah, it's sharing a part of yourself, and also sharing in the labor of creation. And I remember reading that having good sewing skills was critically important to kind of your social position in a community, because if you were getting together, and in a lot of places and times women were getting together to quilt together, and they would all finish each other's quilts. You would do the piecework, the quilt top by hand on your own, but then the quilting would be done as a group effort. And if you had poor sewing skills, you could mess up somebody else's quilt, and you might not then be included in these social gatherings that were really important and meaningful for the community. So you better, it was kind of important that all women in the community had this level of skill so that they could work together to finish these quilts for each other. So yeah, and then I love the Gee's Bend stories where women would hang their quilts on the lines or on the fences outside their home because they wanted to show them off, and people would drive by and look for the quilts, and that was part of what really got she's been recognized for their quilting is that somebody was driving down and saw their quilts and thought, wow, that looks kind of like op art. And, this is I bet there would be people interested in buying these quilts and paying good money for them. And it was an idea to fund the civil rights movement of that area for voting rights. And it was incredible. It raised money for the activism work that was being done at the time and started the Freedom Quilting Bee. And, these women started being able to earn an income and all because, they hung their quilts outside to show their neighbors and everything. Look what I made. There's such a pride in that, at being able to share that. And I know for you working at Joann's, having people come in, they want to show you what
They
they've
do.
made, and especially to show people who make things themselves, right? I
Hmm.
love showing my knitting friends specifically what I make because they know how much work goes into it. I can show my husband, he knows, he watches me, but he doesn't do it. So he doesn't
Yeah.
quite even have the appreciation. But for a friend who does it, they can recognize, oh my gosh, is that like lace weight yarn and you made this whole sweater? Like, that's incredible. That must be like a million stitches in that. And how long did that take you? And or did you go to short rows here? And they get it. They can see the thought and time and effort I put into it. And it's really a meaningful connection. And it feels so good to be seen in that way. Like, yeah, you see my work, you see my thought process, you know what this meant to me.
Yeah. A sweater out of lace weight yarn. That is very impressive.
I've only done one of those,
I think one is probably enough.
but I just finished a vintage sweater, lace, like all over lace sweater on size zero needles with
Oh my
fingering
goodness.
weight yarn. And that was a real labor of love
That, oh
too.
my gosh.
I
Because that
can't say I
is,
really enjoyed the process. I love the finished product.
mhm.
I would probably not do it again.
No, that is definitely something that I like size four weight yarn, like the DK weight yarn.
Mhm.
That's my comfort zone. Sometimes I'll like go down to like size three, like baby weight yarn, but anything less than that, I don't usually get myself into. So I that is a lot of hard work in there with the tiny yarn and the tiny needles.
Mhm.
I want to kind of talk about the transition of like needlework being something that women did, for work, and then it kind of transitioned during like the Victorian era into something that was kind of seen as just like a quiet activity to be done. And then I feel like after the Victorian era, it kind of got not lost, but like it wasn't something that was very mainstream. And I would say probably right up until like the pandemic, like fiber arts had a massive resurgence
Mhm.
after that. Like my store went from selling like $100,000 worth of yarn a year to $500,000 worth of yarn a year. Like
Yeah.
it was a crazy jump of people being interested in it and not just doing it like just for like a summer, but actually getting back into it and it being like a lifelong hobby type thing. And I think that transition is something that we could probably spend a little bit of time talking about.
Sure. And I think it's interesting to think about, the Victorian era, of course, in Europe, the UK, the United States was very different than what was happening in textile work for women in South America and,
Hmm.
Africa and Asia. So there were, parallel things happening, different, very different things happening in these areas. But in the, you know, kind of Western world, this work took on a leisure status. It was a mark of your financial well-being that you could afford to have your wife stay at home and do needlework and embroider things to beautify your home. And having a lot of embroidery and handwork, even lace or other things that women did. Embroidery was maybe embroidery and needlepoint were probably the most common, but other things, anything handmade was a sign that you had the social standing, the financial well-being to have these nice things in your home, these delicate, intricate pieces, and that you didn't have to sell them or not be able to make them because you were too busy with other household tasks or working outside the home. So that was a very interesting shift, where it took on a different meaning and then became much more associated with this type of ideal femininity, Victorian femininity of like a quiet woman who is, you know, patient and obedient and all of these things that then became very tied up with embroidery that hadn't necessarily been tied up with embroidery before, right? That's kind of our association now. And you see a Victorian picture of a woman kind of like bent over her needlework in a nice dress, on a nice velvet couch or something, and you think like, yes, that's what embroidery is, but you don't think of these factories where women would stitch in dark rooms for, till they like basically went blind in their early 20s. And you don't think of, the women in like 11th century, like who made the Bayeux Tapestry in a big space, all kind of stitching together these war scenes. The embroidery has had a lot of different meanings through different times. So other times after the Victorian era, there were times that knitting was incredibly important, like during World War II, when women were knitting socks and hats for the soldiers, and it was seen as a very important part of the war effort. And women were getting together in these like stitch and bitch groups. That's actually where that idea came from, or where that kind of term came from, that women would get together in World War II era and stitch and knit together and talk about, what it was like to have their husbands away or their sons away, and feel like they were doing something meaningful to contribute to. And they were doing something meaningful to contribute. It's interesting, there was like a not free rein given to the women to choose whatever patterns they wanted to make for the soldiers. There was kind of a standardized sock that was preferred, and all of us knitters know Kitchener stitch, and it was from the General Kitchener, who was like, we can't have socks rubbing the soldiers' feet, so they can't have seams. So we need these seamless toed socks. And so there was this, way of joining the toe of the sock together that didn't have any seams so that the soldiers weren't getting blisters in their boots. But also there were things written about how women like cannot just be given the freedom to create their own patterns or create whatever they want. Like that's dangerous. It's giving women too much freedom to think for themselves. So, it had to be these patterns both to protect the soldiers' feet, but also to keep women in line and not make them think that they could just do whatever they wanted, even
Yeah.
in their knitting.
Go about making patterns, having too much freedom, that would have been wrong.
Yeah, can't have that.
Can't have too much freedom. But I really love seeing like in these past few years people coming back to these like textile crafts and fiber arts to just to be creative, like to have like another medium to do something. That's good for the mind to be working on something that's it's not work. It's something that you really enjoy doing, that that you find joy in. And it's nice. One of the parts about doing like knitting or crochet or any other craft to work through like trauma, I do think that there's something really big in that. One of the really first big projects I had done was my parents got divorced when I was in high school, and when I was in college, I made this blanket that like called it my anger blanket, and I just put all my like angry energy into this blanket. And I have it, I still use it, but every time I look at it, I just kind of think about how it's like holding all that
Hmm.
like it holds the anger, and it's not really in me anymore. It's something that I was able to channel that those feelings into. And I think that's something that's really important with these crafts. Like it's not just the yarn, it's also you putting your emotions into it, and you can see it in certain like parts where like the tension's tighter in certain
Hmm.
areas, like how you're feeling. It's a very emotive piece of fabric that you've made. You can see where you've been and how you've gotten, I don't know, how you've progressed.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can even, look and say, oh yeah, I was knitting looser then, I felt good, or I was watching a movie or
Hmm.
wasn't focused on it. And yeah, it can again tell us a lot about ourselves and where we are. It can, be a way to process emotions. And I imagine women for thousands of years did that, had a place to put their anger,
Hmm.
and, sat weaving. The Mycenaeans who were enslaved by the Greeks, were probably sitting down and weaving in their dark cells or whatever, feeling pretty pissed, but
Yeah.
weaving, they had to weave like 14 hours a day as, enslaved people. And, um, but yeah, they could maybe put some of that anger into the cloth that they were being forced to make.
I don't know. I just think there's something just so special about knitting and crocheting. I don't know. It has such a spot in my heart that it's one of my favorite things that like whenever I find someone else that crochets, I'm like, yes, you understand like how you had said about finding other knitters. It's something that I don't know. You kind of just like it feels like I might know them a little bit more than like if I had just met them. But if they tell me they crochet, I'm like, okay, I kind of feel like I know you just a little bit better now.
I know
Um,
I'm so attuned to even just seeing people wear, like if I can tell that their hat is hand knitted, I'm like, who made that hat? Like, was it you? Was it your, sister? Was it your brother? Was it your best friend? Like, it's so like I can spot the knitted stuff a mile away, and I'm always excited when I see someone pull yarn out of their bag on the subway or something. It's just like,
yeah.
ooh, what are you making? I had one woman like follow me out of the train once, and she was like, I was like, I didn't want to like say something to you on the train, but I saw that you were knitting and what are you making? And people are excited to talk with each other about that. And you talk about this difference now with the reasons people are coming to textile crafts. It's not because, they have to anymore. It doesn't really make sense financially to make stuff like it's expensive. You can buy a cheap hat at $10 or something, and it would probably cost you more in your time and materials to make a hat. But people who do it now have really chosen it, and it means something to them, and it does something for them. And, it has lots of different meaning. And I think that's what the book explores is all the different ways that this can create meaning. And for some people, like they just like the repetitive motion of it, and they could make the same project over and over and over again, and they don't care. They just want to make like stockinette triangle shawls all day, or, crochet like the same hats, and they make like 50 of them for newborn babies at the local hospital or something. And it's just like the process of making it and the repetitive motion. And other people want to challenge themselves and really think through, hard patterns and learn new skills and problem solve and, take a really intellectual approach to it. And other people are doing it because it's a social activity and they love going to their local knitting store on Tuesday nights and stitching with their friends. And it's so, and other people are carrying on legacies like the women of Gee's Bend feel, really connected to their ancestors through this quilting work. And it just has so many areas of meaning. And I think it's really incredible right now to see people choosing it for all of these different reasons and finding meaning in it in all these ways.
I just think that how you wrote it in wrote the set up the chapters and explaining how you went through just the various aspects of it. It just really created like just a cohesive feeling for how these crafts and this work has evolved over time and how its meaning has changed or how it's evolved or just added on to itself. And I don't know, I just really appreciated how you spoke about it because I just like I've said, it's got such a special place in my heart that I'm just reading about it from someone who also understands like how these crafts feel to do. It's nice to be able to have that connection.
Absolutely.
Was there anything else you wanted to highlight about your book before we go?
I wanted to say, I guess that whatever you're doing, it doesn't have to be textiles. doing things with your hands, whether it's gardening or woodworking or baking or something, like it really is so valuable to find something to do in this area, in this age where we're on computers so much and, not connected to things tangibly as much as we used to be. Our brains are really wired to move. The motor cortex is a huge part of our brain, and a large part of the motor cortex is devoted to the hands. And so being able to do these skilled things just has so much meaning. To be able to actually make something with your hands feels so empowering and can teach us so much about ourselves and how our minds work. And it's just incredibly satisfying. So I encourage people, even if textile crafts are not your thing, or you feel like you have two left hands or something, like try something, or think about what it is that you do with your hands and what it means to you.
I like that. Doing stuff with your hands, it grounds you a little bit and makes you
Yeah.
more in the now, because it's, things that are tangible, you can see them, and it's not just, a folder on a computer. Sometimes, like, it's something that you can physically see.
Yeah, there's such a pride. Like I think about my kids that are like, look, I made this, and it could be like a pinch pot of clay, from clay, but it's like it feels so good to be able to realize something that's in your mind and then have this kind of tangible thing that you've created. There's a really powerful link there, and I think it's underused or undervalued these days.
Where can people find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is NicoleNehrig.com. You can find me on Instagram, where I am at Nicole Nehrig. And you can find the book wherever books are sold. Ask your local bookseller if they carry it, and if not, if they might order it for you.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you, Nicole, for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation that we've had today.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again to Nicole for coming onto the show and sharing her latest work with us. With Her Own Hands is available for purchase, and I will have Nicole's website linked below. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, please head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts to leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again, and I hope to have you in the next one.